Intertextuality, using references in literary works, a look at Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. What is intertextuality? Author Rob Pope identifies three types of intertextuality. Explicit intertextuality, alluding specifically to another text through quotation or reference. Implied intertextuality, where the allusion is more indirect and may occur through such commonalities as genre or style. Inferred intertextuality, referring to the text drawn on by the actual reader and will likely include texts that have not existed when the text was composed. Intertextuality is the relationship between texts or the use of referencing other texts within your literary work. This, for example, would be having a moment in a book that specifically mentions another existing property, like in the book Ready Player One, where the main character mentions that he downloaded the show Family Ties. This would be an example of explicit intertextuality. For this presentation, I'll be looking at intertextuality in books, most specifically explicit intertextuality in the novel Ready Player One, and how writers can effectively use this style to appeal to your readers and provide context and draw upon ideologies from the other material. So, what is Ready Player One? Ready Player One is a novel written by author Ernest Cline. The story follows a boy named Wade Watts as he traverses a virtual video game known as the Oasis, in an attempt to uncover the mysteries and clues left behind by the creator of the game, whose reward is the creator's vast wealth and fortune. The story is chock full of references of 80s movies and TV shows, as well as video games and current pop culture. I believe that this story is a perfect representation of intertextuality, as the entire story is almost revolved around its references and utilizes them effectively and creatively. The use of intertextuality allows the story to have relevance to real life. It can allow the reader to gain some insight into the setting, time, and place of your story. By using references, you can show the audience where and when the story takes place, rather than just telling the audience. I wrote a small example of what could be used. The boys walked up to the large movie posters plastered across the brick wall. One poster depicted a large man with black sunglasses and a half-metal body under a black leather jacket, holding a pistol. The poster had in big red letters at the top, Schwarzenegger, and on the bottom in metallic text, Terminator. "This looks awesome," said Timmy. "Want to see it with me?" This example shows that the scene is set when the Terminator movie is being released, which can be relevant to the reader. And it already depicts two references in the text, one being the movie Terminator itself, and the other being the actor Arnold Schwarzenegger, which readers can relate to. Using these references, we can also help gain insight into a character's likes and dislikes, as well as a character's personality. Like in the quote before, Timmy saying that the movie looks awesome gives a small insight into what the character of Timmy likes. A better example would be this quote from Ready Player One from the point of view of the main character Wade Watts. "A real low blow in both of their careers," he said, laughing. He loved arguing about old movies, even more than I did. The other gunters in the chat room were now starting to form a small crowd around us to listen in. Our arguments were often high entertainment value. "You must be stoned," I shouted. "Lady Hawk was directed by Richard fucking Donner. The Goonies, Superman the movie, you're saying that guy sucks?" Taking a look at this quote, already we can gauge that the character Wade Watts gets into arguments with this other character about old movies and directors, showing us that he has a passion for these topics, and his emphasis through the use of italics shows that to a larger extent. This quote has a total of 4 references in it, 3 being movies, Lady Hawk, The Goonies, Superman the movie, and 1 being the director of those movies, Richard Donner. This can help appeal to the reader as they may have already known about these movies and gain more insight into who Wade Watts is as a person. This also gives the impression that Wade Watts is a typical, quote, nerd character, which can help the reader understand future motivations and actions throughout the book. This leads us into the benefits of using intertextuality. Intertextuality can bring layers of meaning to the text, with the references being in relation to the story. This would be considered a sophisticated concept, as this can allow the story to draw upon ideologies and concepts from other works to help aid in getting across the themes of the story. This can allow the references to serve as a sub-theme and give all the assumptions and effects of the other text to influence the way of interpreting the original text. Using references can also bring creativity to the story. Like in Ready Player One, it uses references to create a world revolving around these references and composes its own narrative drawn from them, and uses them in this world to create story plots and callbacks to those other references. But intertextuality can be bad if used incorrectly, as it can detach the reader away from your story. By having a reference that doesn't need to be there in the text, it can be confusing for the reader and pull them away from your narrative. Another worry is plagiarism. You have to make sure that you specifically make it clear that it is a reference. But the biggest problem, however, is that the references will not be understood by everyone. You often have to tailor your story to a specific audience, and having a reference to something that is unrelated or doesn't share something similar to your text, the reference can be forgotten and confusing. Now that we have seen the benefits and demerits of using intertextuality, let's look at how we can use it correctly and effectively in our own stories. References shouldn't be placed in a story without any meaning or context. A reference with no meaning can fall flat and be confusing for the reader. Having an 80s movie reference in a story that doesn't take place in the 80s or have any meaning or context to the story or characters can prove to be a waste of space and be seen as a forced grab for appeal. However, references can be used to draw comparisons and help complement the themes presented in the story. For example, having a story show that it is set in the 80s by showing a Terminator poster can also bring double meaning to the text, and the reference to Terminator can help complement the themes of your story by drawing upon Terminator's concept or ideology. It can be shown as a form of foreshadowing to your story. By using the example I presented earlier, the kids seeing the Terminator poster can be a foreshadowing effect to the themes and story that will be presented, as the story could be about a group of kids being pursued by an unknown force. A reference should also be tailored towards your target audience. For example, in Ready Player One, it is targeted towards people who know about video games and 80s movies, and the book makes its target audience very clear from the beginning. So, if a reference is coherent to the themes presented in your story, can relate and complement the themes, as well as be a relevant reference for your targeted audience, then the reference is used correctly. References can mostly be used to appeal to certain readers. By grabbing the attention of readers who understand the reference, they can relate more to the story and characters presented. But I mentioned earlier, these references shouldn't just be used to grab the appeal of the audiences they are targeted to. They should always have relevance to the story. I personally reacted strongly to Ready Player One, as it makes references to many things that I personally enjoy, like Dungeons & Dragons, video games, the internet, etc. This quote from Ready Player One is one that I personally enjoyed, as it makes references to many things present in Dungeons & Dragons. I also grabbed a few other essential items: an extra pair of anti-grav boots, a ring of magic resistance, an amulet of protection, some gauntlets of giant strength. At first glance, it can just seem like it's listing off random items to appeal to people like myself. But all these things have relevance to the story, as in this part of the story, Wade Watts is gearing up to investigate a potential location of importance, and the location is in a PvP, player versus player, zone, so he needs to take all the essentials with him. These references also utilize the points made earlier. The reference is relevant to the target audience, it is coherent to the story, and represents the themes of adventure and fantasy. Intertextuality isn't just referencing a specific movie or video game. It can also be represented in the way the text itself is presented. Through adaptation and style, your text can reference things that it doesn't specifically state. For example, in Ready Player One, Chapter 17, it is presented as a series of text messages. Not only does this reference text messaging, but it also creates the originality within the text, as I personally haven't seen anything like this in other books before. This can be appealing to people who are looking for something different, and be appealing to the modern audience of today, as text messaging is a common practice. This structure and style also complements the themes of Ready Player One, as the story is mostly set in an MMORPG video game world, where millions of players can chat and play with each other. A major point of intertextuality is the reader's input or involvement. A reference must be identified by the reader, and recognizing these references can help shape our response to what is being laid out before us. For example, if mentioning a love story in your novel, it's up to the reader to interpret the reference in their own way. Is the reference foreshadowing to a love plot in the story? Is this love plot going to end like it did in the love story before? All these questions can keep the reader involved with the story, as a reader will have their own interpretation to your story, and using these references can aid in getting a certain theme or point across, keeping the reader involved. But why is intertextuality important? Why should I put references in my novel? Understanding intertextuality can lead to a much richer reading experience, as it can bring new interpretations to the context, idea, and story that you have written. Readers can gain much pleasure from connecting and engaging with a larger literary heritage, and can also invite the reader into checking out the earlier text referenced. The story can gain many layers of meaning from the use of the references by connecting your story to those references. It can help aid the writer to draw their knowledge from the works of others to create an engaging and enriching reader experience. Using the example earlier of Ready Player One, I personally had an enjoyable time reading this novel, as I connected to many of the themes of video game culture and geek culture. I felt like the story was written for people like myself, and that gave the story a personal touch that many other stories can't emulate. For our final thoughts, intertextuality can prove to be a vital piece in creating an enriching reader experience. With examples of books like Ready Player One, we as writers can gain much needed insight into why we should use references in our text. With having references appeal to certain audiences, have meaning and context relating to other stories, creating layers of meanings within the text, increased creativity utilizing different styles and structures apparent in those references, and having a personal touch on a reader's experience, intertextuality provides us with having the tools possible for effectively using those references to achieve a great impact on the story that you have written for your audience. And I hope this presentation has shown why intertextuality is important, and it provides you as a writer to understand how to utilize intertextuality within your own literary content in an impactful and effective manner. Thank you all for listening, and I hope to eventually see more intertextuality in your own works. Thank you.